That's actually a classic. Like,
Isn't it?
the Lightning Labs first produced hats like that in
love
like
it.
2017 when the Lightning Network was new, and then Samsung now also had this Exilian version of that hat.
I love it. Even more now. Thanks, Aaron.
I think the technical community and sort of the influencer Bitcoin community, they're quite different. They have a very different approach to Bitcoin and how they're thinking about Bitcoin and what they're focusing on. Popular community, I'll just call it that, has a very pumpy culture.
Yeah.
You know, Bitcoin is going to the moon, the number's going to go up, etc. While the technical community is actually very focused on the different ways that Bitcoin can fail. So they're sort of keeping the ship going. Bitcoin is great. I think it's the most important technology in the world right now. I've dedicated my career to it. But what I find most interesting is to find the ways that it could potentially fail, because that's how you can stop it from failing.
I heard you use the term, the Bitcoin mind virus. Tell me more about that. I like that.
Yeah, so see, like with the bill now with Cynthia Loomis, she has to now infect the other politicians because she wants to pass the bill. So it's like a mind virus. She has to now teach them what this means and why is this better. Really, people, in order to pursue their goals, have to orange pill each other and have to tell people all around the world about it. Then it's a mind virus. I just wanted to say that one thing that I think we got to remember about all these political games involving Bitcoin is that Bitcoin is supposed to bring you to unite again with people and not to fight. Even if this politician wins or that politician wins or that bill passes or it's going to happen in another way, in the end of the day, you have to remember that Bitcoin teaches you self-sovereignty. So, you know, let it happen. Don't get too worked up about what is going to happen because it's inevitable. What's going to happen is going to happen and you probably have no control over it. And it's not supposed to polarize you, but it's supposed to like bring you powers and sovereignty.
Bitcoin is really designed to be a non-political currency. It's designed to not care about what politicians want in the first place. Having said that, it's still better to see politicians be positive about Bitcoin.
It expands
Like, I'd rather see Bitcoiners propose these kind of things, even though maybe I don't personally care about it that much. But it's still better than politicians calling for bans and for jailing of developers. But ultimately, Bitcoin is, of course, non-political. It's an anarchist form of money.
Guys, welcome to another episode of Cypherpunk'd. I'm here with Aaron Van Wierdom, who is the author of the Genesis book, a podcaster and an editor for Bitcoin Magazine. And I'm also here with Efrat Fettingsen. She's an independent journalist, a podcaster, Bitcoin advocate, and the creator of You're the Voice podcast. Welcome, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks, Manny.
What'd you guys think about Nashville?
The conference?
Yeah.
Woo!
I know you guys spoke on a...
Yeah, it was big. Let's start there. No, it's always an experience. I think, I've been with Bitcoin Magazine for a while now, of course. And especially since 2021, like each of these conferences is unique in its own way. It's always kind of overwhelming. Just the sheer size of it, the number of people that are there, the speakers. It's an experience. I don't know how better to explain than that. It's like a unique experience. It's unlike any other conference. And, I like different conferences for different reasons. Like, I like smaller technical conferences a lot as well. And also they're sort of more intimate and you can sort of meet everyone who's there. And this is sort of the opposite. It's such a massive event that it's unique in that way. But yeah, every year it's been an experience.
Yeah, I loved it. It was my first time in this huge conference. And I love the fact that you could see Bitcoiners from every different stage of their journey. So you could find people that are really beginners that are coming to learn, which I was surprised to see so many. And you can also find the real OGs that are there for years. I think the fact that we've seen so many politicians coming this year from the different spectrum, they were left-wing, right-wing, red, blue, all this crap, which I don't believe in, was really interesting because for me, this is a marcation of a change in how the game theory of Bitcoin is playing out, and the fact that they're starting to understand not just the voter power that they have here that they need to suck up to. 50, 60 million crypto holders in the US is definitely a big electoral power, but also the Bitcoin itself, what that is and what it means for the economy. And even though all the political representatives that were there are also on a spectrum of understanding of Bitcoin, and you can see that like ranging from RFK really getting it, understanding it. I think he's into it for like his second year or so. And
see the evolution there of understanding.
To people like Trump that, you know, are saying some good things because it's written on his messaging board or his teleprompter, to saying really like idiotic things to people in the audience that actually understand one or two things about money. Like, in my time, there was no inflation. And when I come back, there will be no inflation. It's like, really, dude, we know how it works. So the spectrum was there in their level of understanding. But what united all of them was that they understood the power of this technology and what it can probably do in the bigger scheme of geopolitical powers that are playing their game on the big chessboard of the world. I think that was very interesting to see. And I think that the fact that a lot of Bitcoiners started to debate whether we need politicians, we don't need politicians, why are we letting them suck up to us, why are we letting them into the event, was a whole topic of discussion in itself, which is important because in the end of the day, I think most Bitcoiners will agree Bitcoin doesn't care about anything. So, you know, they can come, they can say whatever they want, they can do whatever they want, they can bring their money, they can bring their threats or invitations or sucking up or all these things. In the end of the day, you know, things will play out the way they should because it's a free market. It's an open source technology. And it's a free will that everyone can participate. And I think Saylor said it really well in his speech in Madeira earlier this year, that Bitcoin is for everyone. And it's for the corporations and the governments and the bad people and the good people and the small businesses and, you know, the plebs. Everyone will benefit from it in the end of the day. And so if Bitcoin is really the promise that we know it to be, that it really changes people, that it really flips over its head the paradigm shift of control and power, then these people may start to deal with it maybe from the wrong place, but in the end of the day, they should straighten up to hopefully the right place.
What do you think, Aaron?
It's to your point. So the Bitcoin conference, I guess that's what we're calling it. You know, because people used to call it like the Miami conference, but now we're in Nashville, of course.
Yeah.
So the Bitcoin year conference, Bitcoin
2024.
Yeah, that was this year. It's like the mainstream Bitcoin conference, right?
That's right.
Like, there's different types of conference, but this is sort of the one that the mainstream goes to and the mainstream pays attention to.
Right.
And I do think that if you are a Bitcoiner, if you are interested in Bitcoin, it is sort of, you need to be there sometime. You need to sort of see and experience what that is like rather than like the smaller conference. Like see what this mainstream type of conference looks like. And also because a lot of people watch the live stream and then have an opinion on the conference. But I really do feel, that's why I call it an experience. Like being there really is different than the live stream. Like you got all these different stages. You got the whole booth area. You got all these masses of people. You got it is sort of something to experience, to sort of have an opinion about it. And for me personally, like, is it my personal favorite Bitcoin conference in the world to go to? No, it's not. I like the more smaller technical ones. But even at this conference, you have like the technical stage with good content.
That's right.
It's there. But I do think it's this thing, you need to go there once. You need to see what it's like when thousands and thousands of people are like cheering on some Bitcoiner because he enters the stage. It's
I will say the energy that I felt this time when, you know, people like RFK went up and Trump went up, it was almost like you were at the Super Bowl or some sporting event. I mean, there was that level of energy. I mean, you had, I think, Pete Rizzo and Matt Odell up there like they were doing a halftime show at the Super Bowl. I was like, you got that vibe from
really cool, actually, to see this being a lot more respected and acknowledged or seen. And I think that all the Bitcoiners that are talking about hyper Bitcoinization, like, how do you think this is going to happen if the masses don't step in? At some point, the masses should step in. And if they do, then it's going to be through media, through politicians, through the state. Like, that's how it happens, whether you like it or not. So I think that there's room for all of that. The funniest thing for me was going into the taxis there. And when you go with a colleague, like in the taxi, and you start talking about something of the conference, and the driver goes, "Oh, not you guys again with your Bitcoin." They were so sick of me listening to Bitcoin conversations in the taxis. So the city was like completely orange during those days.
Yeah, so the big jump sort of happened with the Bitcoin 2021 conference. Like before that, all Bitcoin conferences were small, or at least relatively small. And then 2021, Bitcoin 21 was all of a sudden 12,000 people, which it was like a magnitude bigger than anything that happened. And I very well remember I was backstage at the moment that Max Kaiser and Michael Saylor came up, and just the roaring of the entire room, just applauding and standing, like the standing ovation. It was like a different level of Bitcoin conference. And I mean, that's still the energy that it sort of carries with it now, every year. So it's a unique thing that's worth visiting for sure.
Yeah, I remember. I think that was the year there was a super long line around Wynwood, I think. And I just remember thinking, like, for the first time, I was like, wow, I hate bull markets. That was what was going through my head. And like, I have the liberty to say that after you've been through a couple different cycles of, Bitcoin volatility and price movement and price discovery and onboarding new users and educating new people and bringing them on board. Efrat, to your credit, you mentioned Trump, you mentioned RFK Jr., watching RFK Jr. last year, from last year to today, I would say even there was a big difference. I mean, you watch the evolution of his understanding, and Trump obviously is pretty new. He doesn't fully understand all these things, like you mentioned. He's been talked to by people in the industry, and I think he more so sees that, okay, there's jobs, innovation. I think that's the message that he is understanding, but not quite understanding the underlying technology to the extent that RFK Jr. has. But both politicians talked about adding Bitcoin as a strategic treasury reserve asset, which I thought was awesome, right? What are your thoughts there? Do you think that's going to happen?
I think that it will happen, but in a very small way, controlled way, not the big way that we all think and expect. I think they'll take baby steps into it. I gotta also cut Trump some slack, because I did hear Peter McCormack saying that he, in his recent episode, saying that he heard from a person that, like, firsthand, was his dad was orange pilled by Trump. Like, Trump got it, and then Trump called his dad, and it's a super wealthy individual telling him, like, dude, get Bitcoin. Like, this is it. This is the new oil. Right? So I think he does.
Older people I know too.
I think he does get it. I think he's just not too deep into it yet. So it's not exactly.
So it's like there's all these layers.
Yeah.
And you peel back each one. You can spend weeks learning about them.
Yeah. What is Trump looking for really? He's looking for more levers in order to, stay the dominant empire of the world. And if the recent deal, so sorry that I'm like sidetracking here for a second, but if the recent deal with Saudi Arabia just ended on the petrodollar, and he understands that Bitcoin is the new oil, he may try to create some kind of political power over Bitcoin with other states around the world, because he's now holding, I don't know, a lot of mining or a lot of treasury. And so it's going back to your question about treasury. Even if they do start by gradually introducing some of the treasury in Bitcoin alongside gold or whatever other assets that they're talking about, they are essentially, I think, showing the public that they want to battle the biggest pandemic in today's world, which is the printing of the US dollar and the inflation and the huge debt that they have. Now, can they solve this problem with treasury? I am not the one to answer that. I heard Preston Pish talking about it, like with smart people. I don't know anything about finances in that level. But it sounds to me like they understand that they need to take their first steps because it can help them on a geopolitical level. From a financial standpoint, I don't think it can solve the problem. But, maybe Aaron can talk better about that than me. I'm not the expert on the actual financial. And look, they see El Salvador going in that direction. And they know that if they don't take the first advantage, they'll have China or Russia taking more steps. You've seen recently Russia signing a deal with El Salvador in settling cross-border payments with not Bitcoin, with crypto.
Oh, with crypto in general.
Weird statement in my eyes, but I don't know more details than that at the moment. We will watch and see how this unravels. But the fact that El Salvador, a country that now has its reserves in Bitcoin, is also de-dollarizing in a way, taking another distance from the U.S., which is supposed to be its ally. And I remind everyone that the U.S. dollar is a legal tender in El Salvador, is now telling Russia, we are going to do business with you directly through crypto. And Russia is then passing bills for that as well. There are things that are starting to happen on the bigger geopolitical picture that the U.S. has to pay attention to. And I think they understand that, all the candidates.
Let's hear what you have to say, Aaron.
Yeah, in a very very basic level, the game theory of Bitcoin, or at least as Satoshi himself first proposed, is it's good to get some in case it catches on, right?
Yep.
So you first see that happening with like individuals maybe mining when that was very cheap, and then individuals buying, and eventually companies buying it and public companies buying it. And now you even get to the point where governments are considering it or even doing it in the case of El Salvador. So it's the same very basic, game theory sort of assessment that makes sense on every level. So from that perspective, I mean, it seems early for the US to start doing this. You would think it starts with smaller countries like El Salvador, but, eventually it makes sense that also the big countries start doing it. Now, what Trump, I'm not going to guess on Trump's motivation, but
I'll take a crack at it when you're done.
Yeah, go for it. As far as crypto versus Bitcoin goes, it would be more in the interest of the United States, at least more in the direct interest, to sort of expand the whole stablecoin type of industry, right? Like have that be backed by either dollars or I'm thinking of the Dutch term, looking for the English one now.
Treasuries?
Yeah, treasuries. Thank you. Yeah, so in that sense, it could expand the power of the United States through private stablecoins, essentially, which from that perspective, it also makes sense why you might want to ban CBDCs. Like if you cut a deal with the private companies that are issuing something very similar.
That's the American way. I think that's how it should eventually
And that is something that Trump said in his speech in the conference. He said, no CBDCs, but I will work on an official stablecoin for the US. And that is not good news. And I think most of the people that pay attention understood that when he said it in the conference. It's definitely a B2C, a business to consumer or a direct to consumer way to go for the Federal Reserve or the US directly to consumers around the world to help them globalize and financialize the dollar. So stable coins are definitely a vehicle for that. And I think that
it's great for
while
U.S. dollar dominance in the world to have more stable coins, if you're thinking as the U.S. government.
But at the same time, this is the constant perpetuation of feeding the beast of the fiat, right? If you continue to grow the dollar and you continue to print money.
That's exactly what it is. That's what I'm saying.
Exactly. So
you extend dollar dominance.
Exactly. And so, definitely good for Trump. Is it good for the people that are continued to be slaves to the fiat system? And I think that's one thing that Bitcoin is supposed to come to solve. And if we're using Bitcoin as an engine to that, then what have we done?
Yeah, there's a lot of implications, right? Because there's so many places where citizens have hyperinflating currencies, and I think in the short term, giving them access to a stable coin is a good thing. In addition to Bitcoin, right?
Yeah,
allowing them to be able to lock in that, where they don't have such level of volatility like they do with their hyperinflating currencies that are always going down. So I think optionality is always good. As far as Trump's announcement and his thoughts on the adding it to the Treasury Reserve asset, the way I look at it, I think it's almost like a 3D chess move that he didn't even realize he's making, because China and their 100-year plan has been essentially hoarding gold and they're hoarding gold. They don't allow gold to be exported. So in their mind, they think this house of cards of fiat is going to end at some point, right? And that's why they're hoarding all this gold, so they can essentially execute their 100-year plan. They will be the next, reserve currency, or the next great superpower that has that ability. Where I think Trump or whoever is the president, if it's RFK Jr., has the ability here to essentially cut that off, because they've been thinking in 100 years, but Bitcoin didn't exist 100 years ago, right? If we can add Bitcoin as a treasury reserve asset, and inflation does continue to play out, money printing continues to play out, that Bitcoin will continue to see massive price discovery over the next, couple decades. So I think geopolitically, it's a 3D chess move to just, to Satoshi's credit. And also I think Hal Finney said this, have some in case it catches on. Are the odds really 100 million to 1 that it won't, right? I think that's what Hal said.
That's the Hal Finney quote, indeed. Yeah, that's what was his argument for why it makes sense to start mining in the first place back in 2009.
And from what I've been reading over the past week or two, since Trump made that announcement and RFK Jr. made that announcement, the current administration seems to be transferring, because it really costs the U.S. nothing, because we have the largest seized amount of Bitcoin. We can just, instead of selling that, just move it over to the Treasury. So it's actually a really easy political move for Trump and for RFK and for a lot of these candidates to say, is because it doesn't cost anything to do that, right? We already have the Bitcoin. We're just not going to sell it, right? So,
but didn't we see them selling?
That's the current administration in power. So listen to what Trump said, and now it seems the Harris-Biden administration is active. It's just unbelievable.
After Germany doing the same.
Yeah. I'm just curious who makes these decisions, who calls these shots.
Is this confirmed?
I don't know if it's confirmed. Again, that's why I said it's speculation.
Yeah, it's a Twitter.
Okay.
Well, the Bitcoin,
as far as I know.
As far as I know, and the beautiful thing about a globally open source blockchain is that a lot of the Bitcoins did move. You can see that on chain. So that was transferred from the U.S. government to Coinbase or something along those lines.
Right. And and then people started to speculate.
There's some evidence there. And now we're looking, even to.
Interesting.
Now we've seen, massive price disturbances and volatility going in markets.
What we do know is that Germany did do that. And so if the U.S. is going to make the same mistake.
Just a foolish mistake.
That is going to be very sad, definitely.
Yeah. I spoke with Cynthia Lummis when I was. And she's a great senator from Wyoming, while I was at the Bitcoin conference. And she mentioned that she was going to announce the the Bitcoin Reserve Act that she was pushing forward. And hopefully that gets more traction, and we see that come to pass, because that would be really cool. Why
do you think she announced it and not Trump?
I think she was following up on what Trump announced. I think Trump tried to announce it because he was saying, we're going to add Bitcoin to the street.
No, but Cynthia Lummis was on stage first, right?
No, she announced it after.
I stayed after to see her.
Yeah.
Okay.
She was after him, and I was like, that's strange. And she also tried to get people to stay in the room and not go because it was after him.
But he can't.
And I'm like, why didn't you guys
Trump can't just make laws. He's not a dictator. I mean, the president is not a dictator, right? You need the Congress to support the mission, and they kind of work together, right? And
that's probably the
part of the beautiful part of the separation of powers of the United States. But when I spoke to Cynthia earlier that day at another private event, she had mentioned that was going to be what was going to happen.
Right. Okay.
Was she on stage multiple times then?
Yes.
She was.
She was several times on stage.
Right.
I just wanted to say that one thing that I think we got to remember about all these political games involving Bitcoin is that, in my view, Bitcoin is supposed to lower the levels of violence in the world and help it. What is supposed? It's not supposed to. It's like it's doing it.
The game theory.
Yeah, exactly. It's doing it because of its properties and nature. And so when I see politicians starting to, flip the Bitcoin card, I feel like they are trying to polarize people again to this side or that side. And I just wanted people to remember that, Bitcoin is supposed to bring you to unite again with people and not to fight or not to polarize again. So if you understand that in the end of the day, even if this politician wins or that politician wins or that bill passes or it's going to happen in another way, in the end of the day, you have to remember that Bitcoin teaches you self-sovereignty. So, let it happen. Don't get too worked up about what is going to happen because it's inevitable. What's going to happen is going to happen, and you probably have no control over it. And it's not supposed to polarize you, but it's supposed to bring you powers and sovereignty.
Yeah, in a general sense, and I think I said something similar. We were on the live desk for a little while. like Bitcoin is really designed to be a non-political currency. It's designed to not care about what politicians want in the first place. Now, and it's very important that people both realize that and that Bitcoin remains that. Having said that, it's still better to see politicians be positive about Bitcoin.
It expands
Like, I'd rather see Bitcoiners propose these kinds of things, even though maybe I don't personally care about it that much. But it's still better than politicians calling for bans and for jailing of developers and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But ultimately, Bitcoin is, of course, non-political. It's an anarchist form of money.
Bitcoin wins in the end regardless. I just think I
wouldn't go that far, but that is the goal.
I feel that way. I feel like we've reached escape velocity, and that's my personal opinion. But from the point of an entrepreneur who's operating in the space and who's been operating in the United States, the past 4 years have been very rough, right? With the choke point operation that's occurring, getting debanked. I've experienced some of that myself from, the Biden administration proposing a 30% tax on miners, right? It's not going to stop the industry because there's miners all over the world. All it's going to do is negatively affect companies like myself who employ tons of people and hurt the economy and do these types of things, right? And push all the mining infrastructure out of the United States, right? We want it everywhere, right? And, Trump is kind of jumping on that bandwagon saying, hey, we want to mine here. We want to promote it here. And we've seen a lot of that, which I think is every country should be doing that. And basically to what you're saying, it's much better to have that, right? But the attacks have been very real. And yes, I still do believe that Bitcoin, my personal opinion, will win no matter what at this point. But it's much better to have politicians that are, business friendly with positive policies that recognize the value that Bitcoin and these technologies bring.
Right. Right. And at the same time, also remember that you don't need saviors. You don't need any politician to save you or to change your life. You can start doing this today on your own. Really, the whole savior paradigm that we've been sold since we're kids is in a way indoctrinating us or conditioning us to think that we are powerless. And I think if there is one thing that Bitcoin reminds us is that we've got power. So it's like we don't need any specific politician to do something in order for our lives to change. We can start changing things on our own.
Efrat, I heard you use a term, the Bitcoin mind virus. Tell me more about that. I like that.
Yeah, I said that in my eyes, what we're witnessing with the politicians is like that the mind virus just like infiltrated their heads and now they're like obsessed with it and they have to be there, talk about it, onboard more politicians.
Bitcoin does that though.
Yeah. So see, like with the bill now with Cynthia Loomis, she has to now infect the other politicians because she wants to pass the bill. That's the rules of the game, right? So it's like a mind virus. She has to now teach them what this means and why is this better. So I think that if we manage to debunk a lot of the notions about the coronavirus during the pandemic, now we're seeing like a new type of virus that is actually infecting people and is becoming viral. And I love that because if really people, in order to pursue their goals, have to orange pill each other and have to tell people in all around the world about it, then it's a mind virus and it's going to be stronger than any other opposition that will come in. It will finally, I mean, the arguments of Bitcoin are so much more convincing and appealing than any other fiat money type of argument. So I think it will win eventually in that debate, I mean.
You could wonder if that's like, is that the long-term plan? Like at some point you would also think there's maybe some sort of, cap or roof for, okay, now everyone's heard about it. Some people like it, some people don't.
Yep.
And from that point on, the solution is that it's actually going to have to solve problems for people. Correct. Even if they don't believe in it. Then, they say, okay, this is actually better for me. This actually helps me in my actual life.
That's right.
A good example of that, I'm taking a side path, but something like Twitter was in the early days sort of laughed away as, who cares about posting what you're having for breakfast, until people start to see the actual benefits. Like it's a faster way of spreading news. Like it has to have these tangible benefits.
Use cases.
Yeah. And I do think for Bitcoin, at some point, sort of orange pilling isn't going to have that much effect anymore. And it's going to actually have to solve problems.
I agree.
That people have in their real life.
Mm-hmm. Totally agree.
Interesting. I actually subscribed to that first school of thought when Twitter first came out. I was like, this is ridiculous. And I think the argument that changed my mind was a friend of mine. He basically said, he's like, when you're dead in 50 years or whatever, 100 years, your grandchildren would have the ability to go back and look at your thoughts and how you thought about things over time and see life through your eyes. And then I was like, holy shit, that's interesting. That's an interesting way to think of it, right?
Yeah, now we have Monster.
So you think that, education and outreach are important. It's just, we have to really see the real impacts. How do you?
Yeah, I think it's important, but I think it used to be way more impactful than it is now. I think we are reaching the point where most people have now heard of it. Most people have heard the arguments.
You think most
you
people
think so?
have heard of it? I'm not sure.
Yeah.
I don't
I
think
would
so.
say
I think
so.
you may feel that way because you're in that
that's our
community.
world. Yeah.
But when I interface with the outside world,
I'd like to see some data on that.
Yeah,
I feel like
let's pull this. Paul, this is what Paul is for. Paul, can you give us some data? Just
give us some data.
How many people have heard of Bitcoin?
The last I looked at was Kathy Wood's report, and that was about a year or two ago.
I have a feeling many people may have heard the name. They don't even know what it means.
Yeah, 70 to 80% of adults in developed countries.
What about levels of understanding? I think the level of understanding is so low. I speak to so many people, and
And in developing
I think
countries,
education is just not there yet.
Yeah, like that too. That's interesting.
I think Alex Gladstein, his book, Check Your Financial Privilege, I think most of the people here just don't even understand why it's important because they haven't had to understand why it's important, right?
Yeah, so
I
Aaron,
think in developing countries, that's actually a good example of where it actually helps people.
Yes.
You don't have to orange pill them in the sense of explain. It's just better than what they have because what they have is so worthless.
Yeah.
They can't make any international
It says
transactions.
20 to
They're
50.
dealing with high inflation.
When I speak to people that are Hispanic, especially from South American countries, it's a very easy conversation to have as opposed to when I'm talking to somebody who's 60, 70 years old, they've lived their whole life in the United States, and they're like, why does this really matter? Is it more?
These numbers are interesting. I would expect them to be inverted between developing and developed countries, but I think what it refers to or what it attributes to is the level of education or sophistication of the public. And the more educated the public is, the more it probably have heard about it. But it doesn't necessarily mean that the adoption will be higher.
Yeah.
So here in the United States, 9 out of 10 Americans have heard of Bitcoin. That was 2019. So nowadays it's probably higher.
Yeah.
Wow.
But there's it's very possible that from here on out, the actual adoption will start to grow from developing countries, right? Because they needed more there than here.
It's
there's something beautiful about that. If that would happen, that's
it's a way for places like Africa to sort of leapfrog this whole current.
Yeah, and I think that with the wars that we're seeing happening around the world now in different places around the world, or maybe even a World War III, God forbid, I think that more and more people in developed countries will start appreciating Bitcoin as a store of value, as an asset to invest in, to hedge their money, because wars are always bringing about financial insecurity. And so people are looking to gold and, how to hedge their money. And with the ETF's introduction and with the fact that a lot of financial institutions are now more educated about Bitcoin, they will start recommending it more as an asset to invest in. So I think we're going to see a rise there.
Just going to say that Bitcoin is just so many different things to so many different people.
Exactly.
So when people come to our local Bitcoin meetup, right, depending on who it is, I will pitch a different thing that will make more sense to them. An aspect of Bitcoin that, like you just said, right, protect your purchasing power. It's a savings account essentially. It prevents debasement by governments via inflation, via confiscation of your purchasing power, right? Whereas somebody from South America who they may have seen their currency fail, 2 or 3 times in their lifetime. It's, hey, this is a currency has a fixed supply, it's open source, and the government doesn't control it.
Yep.
And hey, look at this chart. It's up 5,000%, 5 million% over the past 20 years. Compare that to a chart of the Venezuelan Bolivar, which is down 99.999%, right? So it's very easy to see for them to understand those fundamental characteristics. Whereas in America, it's a different ballgame, right? And then they can use that currency. Nobody can stop them from using that. That's a powerful tool that, they felt that repression before. Whereas, somebody who's 50, 60, 70 years old here in the United States has always been able to use the dollar. They might get frustrated by their bank asking what they're doing with their money, but by large part that it hasn't impacted them in the same way. But what they have seen is their purchasing power slowly decrease over time, the value of a dollar go down.
Yep. I'm with you. And with more and more great education content that is coming out there, I think it's going to rise in the next couple of years.
How can technologies like Bitcoin promote freedom of speech and combat censorship? What current implementations, projects, and ecosystem do you see being very important for that?
I don't know. I mean, I think there's different technologies that solve different problems, right? I think Tor, to a large extent, solves the problem you're talking about. Mm-hmm. But as we've seen with WikiLeaks specifically, for example, like if you want to monetize your content, in the case of WikiLeaks, that was completely blocked, right? PayPal, credit cards, you couldn't support their work anymore. And that's where Bitcoin really came in to the rescue. As WikiLeaks started to accept Bitcoin, they could keep themselves afloat and eventually even benefit from the price rise quite significantly. Mm-hmm. But I don't necessarily ascribe to the idea that Bitcoin solves everything. Mm-hmm. Other technologies, Nostr, Tor, like these are, I would say that's more the category that actually solves mm-hmm. the censorship itself. But Bitcoin plays a role, at least if you want to monetize.
With the Canadian truckers, we spoke about that one-on-one, Efrat, but that was also kind of a way to combat that censorship that was occurring.
Yeah, and just to add on to what Aaron's saying, I find that a lot of my content over the past few years has been censored or has been like potentially being able to be censored. And so some of it was gone and some of it I had to self-censor in order to not be deplatformed from some platforms. And so when I discovered Nostr, I started using that in order to try and protect some of my work and some of my speech. And recently I just announced that I'm going to put a lot of my past work onto Nostr in order to preserve it. But then I'm learning, because I'm also a student and it takes me time, that sure, it's a decentralized network as well, Nostr, on top of Bitcoin. So we're integrated with Bitcoin, and it has relays where your content or your data actually sits and being delivered between relays. But with media, I do a lot of video content. So media is not decentralized yet. It will still sit on one server. And if someone wanted to take down the server that holds my media, then it can. And so I think, like, continuing to learn from there, I think I need to go there to self-custody as well. I have to have my own server. And again, how do I protect my own server? And what do I do? And do they know who I am? So there are issues that I think we still need more solutions for, more innovation, more entrepreneurship to come and look at anti-censorship technologies or freedom technologies in order to help us protect what's ours, whether it's our data, our words, our thoughts, our ideas. Because what we're experiencing these days is very similar to burning books in the 1930s or 40s, right? So I believe that there is a very high importance to how we preserve data, information, and ideas, and we need more people, smart people, to be working on those kind of projects. And I think Nostr is a great project in the right direction, and we need more power and more smart people on that.
Yeah, there's an argument to make, of course, that you can publish on the Bitcoin blockchain as a form of, a censorship-resistant medium. Mm-hmm. But I don't think the Bitcoin blockchain is the best.
It's an expensive place to publish, that's for sure.
Yeah, I don't necessarily see the benefit of using Bitcoin over BitTorrent, for example, if you want to mm-hmm. publish something in that way. So it's possible, but I see Bitcoin ultimately as money. Like, that's what it's good at, censorship-resistant money, and that is in itself mm-hmm. important for publication. But to sort of turn that around and use Bitcoin itself, it's possible, but I think you're using an inefficient tool.
It's an overkill, right?
Yeah, right, yeah.
Yeah, that's how I see Bitcoin as well, right? There's a lot of talk about this and all these different...
And I really don't think that X today is with capital T, the solution for censorship, because X is also censoring some things or some people. And, with all the respect to Elon Musk, he's still one guy, centralized power that is centralizing our data and information. And he wants to turn X into the app of everything, like WeChat. We talked about China, right?
Kind of what we talked about before.
Yeah, payments and e-commerce and so definitely integrating whatever kind of either CBDC or crypto or stable coin into it. And
it's
then
that same concept of authoritarianism, right? Where it's like you've got somebody in power now who's good,
great
but
stuff
you never
into
know.
it. So it lures as many people in.
Yeah.
And including me with my close to 100,000 followers, that's a good social graph, which I can't take with me anywhere if they close me down or if I become less popular tomorrow morning. Whereas in Noster, my social graph goes with me if I change client or go to another app. So that's very good power that we don't have with places like X, because everyone's like praising X as being like the home of free speech. It's not really. It's still
better
centralized.
than the alternatives for sure.
Sure, it's better, but it's not freedom.
It's got that same problem of an authoritarian where it's got that central point of failure where Elon is, mostly benevolent. And we saw what it was before when Jack was in control. And then, who comes after Elon? We don't know, right? We don't know what they're like. It's like, who comes after Bukele? We don't know, right? We don't know what they're going to do. That's the same argument, I think, there. Can you talk a little bit about
the other part of it is, of course, that Elon, whoever owns Twitter, is going to be subject to the same incentives ultimately, the same economic incentives.
True.
So that's why people talk about freedom of speech and freedom of reach, right? Mm-hmm. So if we now look at our Twitter feeds, it all looks the same. I think we are all seeing the same thing nowadays. Yeah. We're all seeing the same.
And the same people becoming viral.
Yeah. So it doesn't even matter who you follow anymore. So that's completely changing. And that, Elon's, these are sort of fundamental economic incentives that Elon doesn't control either.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Can you talk a little bit more about, you mentioned this concept of a social graph.
Right. So a social graph is basically your follower base and your, when you're on Facebook and you now want to, and you've accumulated 10,000 followers on Facebook and they now ban you, or you decided that you're done with Meta, you want to take that data and go to another social media platform, you can't take the 10,000 followers with you. You can't even download their email addresses. This is data that belongs to Meta.
It's that lock-in.
It's a lock-in. And you've lost your hard-earned follower base, because if you're a content creator or just someone that likes to communicate and socialize with people through social media, then you can't do that if you're not under the Big Brother's watch. And in Noster, you can. If you gain 10,000 followers on Noster, and you decide to switch to another app that uses Noster as a protocol, as the underlying protocol, you can take the 10,000 people with you. And so no matter what kind of application or use case you'll be using in the end of the day, you'll be able to benefit from it. And I think a good example for it is a new startup that is now coming up called Satlantis by Alex Vetsky, that is built on top of Noster, that is basically going to be a combination of, how do you call the travel app? TripAdvisor meets a social network, meets Twitter in a way, or Instagram more correctly, because it's highly visualized. So think about Instagram meets TripAdvisor because it's for travelers and nomads. If you go to a certain city, I come here to Naples, I show up the Naples page on the Satlantis app, which is based on Noster. And what I'm getting there is all the recommendations and all the feed that is constructed from stuff that my social graph, my followers or my friends have recommended in Naples. Mm-hmm. And I trust them. So I know that what I'm seeing now is highly verifiable, or at least in my taste, because I trust those people. And so there's a good connection between your social graph and between the actual data and information that you'll be seeing. But this is thanks to the fact that you can take that asset that is called a social graph with you from one app to another that is using Noster in the background, whether it's a social media app or Satlantis, or in future you're going to have, I think, a lot of different media and content related use cases and applications that will be developed over Noster. So I think that's very, very cool, because that's a very fundamental principle of social media, your social graph, the people that you interact with, because that's what social media is all about. Yeah.
I think we could talk for an hour just about that.
I know, but I think we could have wrapped up.
Final question for both you guys. You guys have both interviewed a lot of people that are, very well known in the space. What are some questions that you guys feel like you don't get asked enough in your different interactions, your different podcasts, your different interviews? What is a topic that you think deserves more focus when it comes to Bitcoin or decentralized technologies in general?
I mean, I mostly write or wrote. Well, I'll start writing again at some point. No, when I was more actively writing for Bitcoin Magazine, I mostly wrote technical articles. And I think, okay, this is the answer. I think the technical community and sort of the mainstream or influencer Bitcoin community, they're quite different. They have a very different sort of approach to Bitcoin and how they're thinking about Bitcoin and what they're focusing on. And I think the technical community, for example, has a much, like the popular community, and I'll just call it that, has a very, pumpy culture.
Yeah.
Bitcoin is going to the moon, the number's going to go up, etc. While the technical community is actually very focused on the different ways that Bitcoin can fail. So they're sort of keeping the ship going. And I think that's generally underreported. Like I like that focus, at least personally. I also like to focus on, okay, Bitcoin is great. I think it's the most important technology in the world right now. I've dedicated my career to it. But what I find most interesting is to find the ways that it could potentially fail, because that's how you can stop it from failing. You need to first identify, in which ways Bitcoin is not perfect, so you can sort of bring that to the light and consider that and make sure it doesn't happen. So I think that's the technical community is way more focused on that. Like they're trying to figure out what can go wrong here, and let's prevent that from going wrong. And that's generally not a topic that I hear a lot on like podcasts or, influencer level Bitcoin media. Well, at least for me personally, that's the most interesting thing that I like to sort of focus my attention on.
It's funny when I think about those different groups of people, I feel like, the latter, the technical people are like the developers, and they're just like, if you think about it like a company, it's like they're the ones who are making everything. And then like you said, the community, the number go up. That's like the marketing department, right?
Yeah.
Bitcoin naturally has this phenomena that Satoshi baked into the game theory itself that sort of says, hey, the number's going up, which draws in more eyeballs, brings in, and not everybody stays. They go through a cycle. But some people, it's like this. It looks like a Ponzi scheme on the outside, and it brings in all these eyeballs. And then it's like when you peel back that first layer of the onion, you're like, holy shit, wow.
The reason so you give a good analogy of like the CTOs versus or the developers versus the marketing department. And I think that's a pretty good analogy, and I think you need both. But I think when the marketing department gets out of sync with the developers, then that can lead to problems. And I do think we've seen that.
I like that.
We've seen that sort of ahead of the block size wars, I would say, where the marketing department was selling one thing, while the developers knew that wasn't actually possible. So, and then when we got to a point where, basically a decision had to be made, then the marketing team started to say, hey, we've been telling all these people this one thing, developers go and do it. But the developers were saying, no, that's actually not possible. That's insecure. That's how Bitcoin might fail if we go that way. And that, I think that's sort of, that's where that whole war emerged from the marketing department and the technical community not actually speaking with each other at all, basically. Like you had the technical people that were on the mailing list, and a lot of the, marketing people weren't even reading that. They weren't even aware of the trade-offs. And so they were sort of putting out a message. And then they themselves probably also got very disappointed when it turned out the message they had been telling people was not realistic. And that led to a lot of tension. And, it would be nice if we can prevent situations like that in the future, which does mean I think there needs to be more attention for, the technical community and what they're working on and what they're thinking about and their perspective on Bitcoin.
How do you do that in like such a...
Well, that's a challenge, right?
Like
because the developers,
right? That's the downside of decentralization in some way. There's no central coordination of
that is a problem. And then the other obvious problem is that the technical people, the developers, are developers because they're not good at marketing. So they are probably on average not the best podcast guests because they don't have that sort of flair to sort of make it a fun watch in general. Like they're...
Yeah, it almost feels like if I take what Aaron's saying and put that in parallel to the business world where I come from, the corporate technical world, there's a function in tech companies called product marketing, and that's what they're good at. They're the ones speaking with the developers and then conveying those new features, challenges, user requests, etc., to the marketing team. They're like the proxy layer between the developers and the marketing,
Right.
in order to collaborate and communicate. And it's almost like Bitcoin needs that middle layer of product marketing that will mediate between the developers and the marketing. It's funny that you called it marketing. I love it.
That's the way I think about it.
Right. And I fully agree. So that's one thing that maybe that's like a call to action to whoever is listening. Maybe we should like start as a community thinking about like product marketeers, people that come from that technical background, that have the ability to work with developers, take out the development features and roadmaps and analyze them and then digest them to the podcasters and the educators, etc. And what I'd like to add on top of that, to your question about what is not being asked enough or what is not being talked about enough, is you said rightfully so that, you know, Satoshi put inbuilt into the system the number go up effect as the biggest trigger. Mm-hmm. Now, people in the community that don't understand marketing, in my humble opinion, they think that the number go up is the actual marketing. It's not. It's a trigger. What it does is it gets people attention. That's what it does. And then when you have their attention, then you need the marketeers to work. What does it mean? You need the educators, you need the podcasters, you need the writers, you need the authors, the content creators to all work to get that attention and convert it into the next step, which would be to buy Bitcoin or to, I don't know, to read about Bitcoin, etc., and go through the journey. And I think that the community at large is not speaking enough about how to encourage and support educators. Everyone's speaking about how to support developers, but they're not speaking about how to support as a community educators, because educators will be the people that will actually take those people that are coming because we got their attention and converting them and adding them into the pool of Bitcoiners. And if educators are not receiving as Aaron rightfully said, the education from the developers, but also the funding, also maybe it's like a direct from consumer donation, or maybe it's a grant, or maybe it's, I don't know, sponsorship. Like these things are not being talked about enough because the education layer also needs support of the community.
That's why we're here.
Yep.
That's the mission. That's the goal. I think you hit the nail on the head. You know, and I think Satoshi was probably largely from that secondary group that Aaron mentioned, the developer. I think he even said at one point, you know, I'm not good with these things. I'm just good with code. He had that quote.
I'm not good with words.
I'm not good with words. But when he, you know, was developing like the B for Bitcoin, it was just like this very vanilla, just generic B, right? And then I think he thought about this just from like a developer, right? Just from a game theoretical point of view. And he's like, I don't want to think about it anymore. Here's the game theory. Number's going to go up. It's all based on the fundamentals of the math, and that's going to attract attention.
Let the games begin.
Right? So fascinating.
So, Maddie, this was from Nashville. First question.
I love that.
Make Bitcoin great again. I loved it. It was such a good take on MAGA. So I grabbed that from Nashville.
Nice.
That's actually a classic. Like, the Lightning Labs first produced hats like that in like 2017 when the Lightning Network was new, and then Samson Mao also had his Axelian version of that hat. So this is like the first
writing.
It's a
This is like the first generation of that hat.
Love it. Even more now. Thanks, Aaron.
Guys, fascinating insights, fascinating conversation. Thanks so much for coming on.
Thanks
it's been a pleasure.
Having us.
Thank you.